There's a bathtub in East Orange, New Jersey that tells a story nobody wanted to hear. November 29, 1909. A young woman sits in cold water, head submerged, 80 pounds of skin and bone. The note beside her says, "Suicide." The doctor who found her wasn't buying what they were selling. What he didn't know yet was that this death marked the end of a chain stretching back years, through burned bodies, drowned babies, and a family that had turned murder into profit. Standing in the hallway, draped head to toe in mourning clothes with her face hidden behind heavy veils, was the woman who'd orchestrated it all. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about 3 educated church-going women from Christiansburg, Virginia, who killed their own blood for insurance money and nearly got away with it. If you appreciate hearing these old stories told right, hit that subscribe button and stick with me. This one's gonna shake you. Chapter 1. The Doctor and the Body. Dr. Herbert Simmons climbed those porch steps around 4:45 that afternoon, medical bag in hand. The call had come in strange, a woman's voice, too calm, reporting an accident and nothing more. When the door opened, he found himself facing a figure that belonged in a graveyard. Tall, impossibly thin, shrouded in funeral attire so complete he couldn't make out a single feature. But her accent was Southern, soft and eerily polite. "Come in, sir." Down a dark hallway she led him to a bathroom at the end. Inside sat Oceana Sneed. They called her O.C., naked and lifeless in a foot of frigid water, knees drawn up, one hand loosely holding a washcloth, head tilted under the faucet. Rigor mortis had already set in. She'd been gone at least a day, maybe more. Next to the tub lay a neat pile of clothes with a suicide note pinned to the top. Simmons turned to his guide. "Why'd you wait so long to call?" She asked not to be disturbed. The house had no heat, no gas for cooking, barely any furniture to speak of, and this woman, Virginia Wardlaw, he'd learned, stood there calm as a Sunday sermon, while her niece sat dead in freezing water. His gut refused to accept suicide. He called the police. What came out in the investigation shocked the entire country. O.C. Sneed wasn't the first person these women had killed. She wasn't even the second. The woman who drowned her wasn't just an aunt. It was her own mother and 2 other aunts, working in conspiracy, who'd been starving her since infancy. To understand how we got to that bathroom, we need to travel back to the mountains, to Christiansburg, Virginia, where the Wardlaw name still carried weight. John Baptist Wardlaw, the patriarch, had served on the South Carolina Supreme Court. His wife, Martha Goodall, came from old Southern money stretching back generations. Their children were educated, cultured people, the kind who taught Latin in prestigious schools and quoted scripture at dinner. 3 of those children were sisters, Virginia, Caroline, and Mary. Around 1902, all 3 converged on Christiansburg to run the Montgomery Female Academy, a girls' school that had been in the family for years. Virginia was the brilliant one. She'd attended Wellesley College, a rare achievement for any woman in those days, and had served as headmistress at the sole female college down in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Students respected her sharp mind and commanding presence. Under her leadership, the school prospered. Then, Carolyn arrived, and everything rotted from the inside. Carolyn had been removed from teaching positions before for what administrators called unstable behavior. When she took over at Montgomery, she immediately started making changes that defied logic. Students got switched between classrooms for no reason. Doors suddenly sported 2, sometimes 3 padlocks. And she introduced something new to the household: occult practices. Rituals performed after nightfall. The 3 sisters took to wearing mourning attire constantly, full funeral dress with heavy veils covering their faces, as if perpetually attending a burial. They'd call for a carriage after dark and ride out to Sunset Cemetery. Townspeople reported seeing them hovering over certain graves, moving in ways that suggested ceremony rather than grief. One taxi driver would later testify that he'd driven them to the cemetery late one evening and, curious, stayed back to watch. What he witnessed made his blood run cold. Some kind of ritual performed over a plot that would eventually hold Virginia herself, like she was preparing her own resting place years in advance. The graves they visited belonged to their brother John Banks Wardlaw and his wife Lizzie, both of whom had died tragically young back in 1880 and 1881. What the sisters were doing out there in the darkness, nobody could say for certain, but it looked like something beyond ordinary mourning. The cemetery visits weren't the strangest behavior, though. The school had a mailman who made regular deliveries. Sometimes, and this is where it gets truly sinister, the sisters would lock him in a room when he arrived. While he sat trapped, they'd go through his mailbag, examine his personal belongings, rifle through anything he carried. Then they'd lean in close and tell him if he breathed a word of this to anyone, they'd kill him. Man was absolutely terrified. But back then, you didn't cross wealthy white women with family connections. So he kept his mouth shut and his fear to himself. Students started fleeing the school. The ones who stayed whispered about waking in the dead of night to find the sisters standing motionless at the foot of their beds, watching through those veils, sometimes murmuring words that sounded like chanting. Parents heard the rumors and yanked their daughters out. Enrollment plummeted. Meanwhile, Caroline had a family of her own. Her daughter, Oceana, Ose, had been born back in 1885 to Caroline and Colonel Robert Maxwell Martin, a Confederate veteran. That marriage ended when the colonel died under circumstances nobody could quite explain. Caroline collected $10,000 in life insurance. Whispers of poison circulated through the community, but nothing was ever proved. Caroline had another child, too, a boy named Hugh Hodge Martin. When Hugh was 7 years old in 1888, he tumbled down a flight of stairs and died several days later from his injuries. Caroline collected $22,000 on that child. Again, suspicions floated like smoke, but solid proof remained elusive. O.C. somehow survived her childhood. Barely, because according to testimony that would emerge years later in court, Caroline and her sisters had been attempting to starve that girl to death from the moment she was born. The reason why remains one of the darker mysteries of this whole affair. But O.C. grew up thin, perpetually ill, and completely under her mother's iron control. Mary Sneed, the third sister, had 2 sons, John Wardlaw Sneed and Fletcher Wardlaw Sneed. Both young men had been living down in Linville, Tennessee, running a sawmill together and building decent lives. In 1899 and 1903, they'd married 2 sisters, daughters of a local lawyer. Fletcher wed Vashti McLaurin, and John married her sister, Anna Laird McLaurin. Double wedding, good prospects, futures that looked promising. Then Aunt Caroline came calling, and everything fell apart. Chapter 2. Dominoes Falling. Caroline appeared at John Sneed's door in early 1906 with demands he return to Christiansburg to teach at the family school. His wife, Anna, could smell danger on her aunt, like smoke on clothing. She begged her husband to refuse. John did refuse at first. Even had the local sheriff escort Caroline off his property when she wouldn't accept his answer. Told his neighbors he wouldn't let that woman wreck his home the way she destroyed everything else she touched. But Caroline returned weeks later, and this time, for reasons nobody could ever fully understand, John agreed to go. Left his wife behind in Tennessee with promises he'd return soon. Anna wrote letters. They went unanswered. Her health deteriorated from worry and heartbreak until they had to place her in a sanitarium, where she'd eventually die without ever seeing her husband again. Up in Christiansburg, John Wardlaw Sneed began experiencing what you might call an extraordinary run of misfortune. First incident, he fell off a train near Roanoke while traveling with Aunt Caroline. She insisted it was accidental. The brakeman who witnessed it told police the fall looked deliberate, said the way John went off that train wasn't natural at all. He survived, though badly injured. Weeks later, someone pulled him from the school's cistern, a deep well for catching rainwater, moments before he would have drowned. Virginia raised the alarm, claiming John had been taking measurements for a new water line when he slipped and fell in. Fortunate that someone heard the commotion. Then came February 1906, 8 o'clock on an otherwise ordinary morning. Virginia's scream brought half the school running. They found John on the floor of his room, thrashing as flames consumed him. His nightclothes were drenched in kerosene, fire eating him alive from feet to chest. 3 hours it took him to die, every minute of it suffering I wouldn't wish on any living soul. The sisters claimed he must have spilled lamp oil on himself in the darkness. But here's what made that story reek. John Wardlaw Sneed had recently changed his life insurance beneficiary from his wife Anna down in Tennessee to his Aunt Virginia up in Christiansburg. When he died, Virginia collected $12,000, nearly $500,000 in today's currency. Insurance company paid out without much fuss. Case closed officially. But folks in Christiansburg started crossing streets when they saw those women approaching. While John was dying, Caroline made another trip south. This time she targeted Fletcher, John's younger brother, claimed urgent family business in Louisville required his immediate attention regarding property matters. Fletcher's wife, Vashti, didn't want him to go, but Caroline had a way of bending people to her will. Fletcher departed with his aunt. A week passed before Vashti received word that Fletcher had fallen seriously ill in Chattanooga. She traveled there immediately to nurse her husband back to health, only to have Caroline bar her from entering the sick room. Too ill for visitors, Caroline explained coldly. Vashti returned home and waited like Caroline instructed. When Fletcher still hadn't returned after another week, she made a second trip to Chattanooga, only to discover Caroline had moved him from one boarding house to another, always staying a step ahead, like she was hiding him. Eventually Vashti gave up and filed for divorce. What else could the woman do? Shortly afterward, Fletcher surfaced in Christiansburg and married his first cousin, Caroline's daughter, Osie. The ceremony happened in secret initially in Louisville in 1906. The family claimed they'd opposed cousins marrying, but they came around suspiciously fast. A second ceremony took place in Jersey City in January 1908, right before Osei gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Mary Alberta. That infant died 2 days after birth. Now, around this same time, Easter Sunday 1908, something peculiar happened over in Roanoke. A married couple named Hancock opened the back door of their boarding house at 24 Wells Avenue, the building that's now the Hotel Roanoke, and discovered a baby girl on their doorstep. They took her in with kind hearts and named her Rita Josephine. Few weeks passed. Then 2 women wearing heavy mourning veils took rooms at the boarding house. The older one, calling herself Mrs. Martin, became obsessed with that foundling baby. She'd hover over Rita, pick her up constantly, whisper to her, started insisting she needed to take the child to Christiansburg, claiming mountain air would be better for the infant's health. Mr. Hancock refused outright. That's when the telephone calls started. Day and night, the phone would ring. Morning, afternoon, midnight, didn't matter. The sisters calling and calling, begging and demanding to be given that baby. Mrs. Hancock said it got so bad they couldn't sleep, couldn't have peace. The women were relentless, desperate in a way that felt wrong. Finally, the sisters departed, leaving their room in shambles. But they'd also left behind 2 suitcases. When the Hancocks opened them, they found one packed with baby clothes, a complete wardrobe sized from newborn all the way up to 12 months. There was also a tin of scented salve that Mrs. Hancock swore smelled exactly like the blanket Rita had been wrapped in when they found her. Rumors spread that Rita Josephine was actually Osei's first daughter, the one supposedly dead 2 days after birth. But nobody could prove it, and the Hancocks kept that child and raised her as their own. By 1908, the school in Christiansburg was hemorrhaging. The sisters had run up debts throughout Montgomery County. Fraudulent business schemes, worthless checks, borrowed money with no intention of repayment. Parents who hadn't already withdrawn their daughters did so now. Enrollment collapsed to nothing. Before abandoning town, the sisters continued their nocturnal cemetery visits, 3 figures in mourning dress moving between tombstones like shadows with purpose. They left Virginia in late 1908, headed north to New York and New Jersey, left behind angry creditors, ruined reputations, and a graveyard full of young people who died too soon. They also left behind something else. When police later searched the old school property during the murder investigation, they discovered human remains scattered across the grounds. In the cistern, the same well John had nearly drowned in, they found the body of an infant, an illegitimate baby born to one of the students years earlier, a scandal that had been whispered about but never resolved. The child had vanished without explanation. That cistern still exists, buried beneath what's now the gymnasium of the current school building. Maintenance workers and late-night custodians claim that if you press your ear to the floor in certain spots, you can hear a baby crying from somewhere deep below. Chapter 3. The Trap Closes. In March 1909, Fletcher Sneed vanished, disappeared without warning or explanation, abandoning his pregnant wife to the care of her mother and aunts. Caroline told Osei that Fletcher was dead, that she was a widow now and would need to depend on family for everything. But Fletcher wasn't dead. He'd fled to Canada, assumed the name John Lucas, and taken work as a cook at the New Murray Hotel in St. Catharines, Ontario. He never contacted his wife again, never sent money, never even confirmed he was breathing. Whatever Fletcher knew or feared about his mother and aunts, he chose to save himself and leave his wife to them. Osei's health collapsed almost immediately. Dr. William Pettit was the first physician to examine her, and what he observed troubled him deeply. The pregnant woman before him showed signs of severe malnutrition, depression, and what he professionally termed general weakness. When he attempted conversation, she seemed frightened of the very people caring for her. Pettit left specific instructions: proper nutrition, adequate rest, appropriate medical attention. On his return visit, not a single directive had been followed. The sisters, faces hidden behind their veils, would greet him with excuses. Too poor to afford it, too busy to manage it, too complicated to arrange. He kept visiting for a while, but since the family wasn't paying his fees, eventually he stopped coming. That's simply how medicine worked in those days. Another doctor got involved after Pettit withdrew. When this physician saw how dangerously thin Osei had become, he started smuggling food to her during his visits. After her baby was born in August 1909, a boy they named David, this same doctor actually climbed through a window to check on mother and child because the sisters refused him entry through the front door. Virginia discovered him and physically expelled him from the premises. Months crawled by. Pettit got summoned back to the home. What he found horrified him. Osei had deteriorated even further, barely conscious now. The infant was nowhere in sight. The sisters had transported David to a hospital and abandoned him there, claiming poverty prevented them from affording his care. That's when Virginia made a suggestion that turned Pettit's blood to ice. She asked him to inform Osei she was dying and assist her in drafting a will. Instead, Pettit arranged for a professional nurse to provide proper care. The nurse lasted exactly 1 day before the sisters drove her away. When Pettit presented his bill for $100, Virginia countered with an offer. Forget the bill entirely, and they'd make him a $1,000 beneficiary in Osei's will. Dr. Pettit refused. He recognized criminal activity when it stared him in the face, and he decided to report everything to the authorities. But when he returned to the address for one final check on his patient before filing his report, the house stood empty. The sisters had relocated, taking Osei with them. They resurfaced in September 1909, different Brooklyn neighborhood. A lawyer named Julius Caraba received an unusual visit from a tall figure wrapped in heavy mourning veils. A dying woman required assistance preparing her will immediately, she explained. Would he come right away? Caraba followed the woman to a sparse apartment and found Osei in a bedroom, so emaciated she barely seemed real. Caroline and Virginia stood sentinel over her, chanting what sounded like prayers or incantations. After they finished their ritual, Virginia asked if Osei wanted to prepare a new will. Osei's voice emerged so weak, Caraba had to lean close just to hear. He told the sisters this woman needed a doctor urgently, and food. Anyone could see she was starving to death. The sisters claimed inability to afford either. Caraba, a fundamentally decent man, offered to write them a check immediately to cover those expenses. The sisters left the room to search for a pen. In those precious seconds alone, Osei reached beneath her pillow and extracted a will she'd written in secret. She pressed the document into Caraba's hands whispering that she wanted everything left to her grandmother, not her mother, not her aunts. She asked him to serve as executor. When the sisters returned, they offered Caraba $7,000 to alter the will and name them as beneficiaries instead of the grandmother. The lawyer looked at those veiled figures, looked at that dying young woman in the bed, and flatly refused. The sisters terminated his services on the spot. By October, Virginia got served with legal papers for non-payment on a new piano. Her response to the lawsuit chilled everyone who heard it. "Wait until we bury our dead." O.C. was still alive when Virginia spoke those words. Still breathing, still suffering. But to Virginia, she was already a corpse, just a matter of waiting for the insurance payout. Late October brought one final move to 89 East 14th Street in East Orange, New Jersey. The apartment was barely habitable, no heat source, no gas for cooking. The furniture consisted of 2 cots, 1 threadbare rug, a single chair, and a barrel serving as a makeshift table, nothing else. On November 29, 1909, someone telephoned the police to report an accident. Dr. Simmons discovered O.C.'s body in that frigid bathtub, deceased at least 24 hours before anyone bothered calling for help. Beside the tub lay a suicide note, almost too perfectly composed. "Last year my little daughter died. Other near and dear kindred too have gone to heaven. I long to go there too. I have been ill and weak a very long time now. Death will be a blessed relief to me in my sufferings. When you read this, I will have committed suicide. My sorrow and pain in this world are greater than I can endure." Signed, O.C.W.M. Sneed. Simmons alerted the police. The police brought in investigators, and when they searched the sisters' possessions, they uncovered evidence that shattered the suicide narrative. Multiple suicide notes, all written in identical handwriting, all discovered in Caroline Martin's belongings. She'd been practicing O.C.'s death for months, drafting the note repeatedly until she perfected it. The autopsy revealed morphine in O.C.'s system. The sisters had been administering regular doses, claiming it was for postpartum pain. But O.C. had given birth months earlier. The morphine served a different purpose, keeping her weak, compliant, and confused. When investigators dug into the family's financial history, they discovered life insurance policies totaling $32,000 on O.C. alone. Combined with the $12,000 from John Sneed, the $22,000 from young Hugh Martin, and the $10,000 from Colonel Martin, these women had collected $76,000 from dead family members over the years, equivalent to nearly $2 million today. December 22, 1909. All 3 sisters were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Chapter 4. Justice and Ghosts. The newspapers labeled them the 3 Sisters in Black. Every courtroom appearance, they wore complete mourning dress with veils so thick their faces remained invisible. They looked like mourners attending the funeral of the young woman they'd murdered. The prosecution's evidence was devastating. Dr. Petta testified about the starvation and the family's refusal to provide care. Julius Caraba described the bribe attempt and the hidden will under O.C.'s pillow. The brakeman from Roanoke came forward about John Sneed's suspicious fall from the train. Even Sonny Correll, caretaker from the Montgomery School, testified about rescuing John from that cistern. And then there were those practiced suicide notes, all in Carolyn's handwriting, identical to the one found with O.C.'s body. Investigators had also tracked down Fletcher Sneed in Canada and questioned him extensively. They found no evidence connecting him to the conspiracy. He granted one brief interview to the press, then vanished again into anonymity. Whether he understood what his mother and aunts were planning, nobody knows. He never spoke of it again. During the proceedings, Caroline Martin's behavior made clear something had fractured in her mind. Screaming fits, irrational outbursts, bizarre tirades that made no coherent sense, yet the judge declared her mentally competent to stand trial anyway. Late in the trial, Caroline finally offered her version of events. She claimed O.C. had become a morphine addict who constantly spoke of suicide. On the night of O.C.'s death, Caroline said she'd accidentally administered an overdose. When she realized her mistake, she attempted revival by submerging her daughter in cold water in the bathtub. When hope vanished, so did Caroline, fled the scene in panic. The jury saw through the story like glass. Virginia Wardlaw never faced trial. While awaiting her court date in Trenton Penitentiary, she stopped consuming food, started feeding her meals to the rats infesting her cell instead. By August 12, 1910, she was dead. Whether illness or self-imposed starvation killed her, the doctors couldn't determine with certainty. Her body went back to Christiansburg for burial in Sunset Cemetery. In that same plot, she'd performed rituals over years before, as if she'd been preparing her own grave all along. January 23, 1911. Caroline Martin pleaded guilty to manslaughter as part of a negotiated deal. When the judge pronounced her sentence of 7 years in prison, she released a shriek that echoed through the courthouse walls. "I do not deserve it," she screamed. Bailiffs had to carry her from the courtroom still seated in her chair, wailing and thrashing wild enough to shake the walls. She went to New Jersey State Prison initially, then got transferred shortly after to the New Jersey State Lunatic Asylum. Like her sister before her, Caroline refused food. She died June 20th, 1913. The autopsy showed arterial disease, but whether her death resulted from suicide or natural causes remained unclear. Mary Sneed walked free entirely. See, once Caroline pleaded guilty to manslaughter instead of murder, prosecutors couldn't charge Mary as an accessory. The law provided no mechanism for accessory to manslaughter, only to murder. A legal technicality saved her life. Mary relocated to Colorado with her surviving son Albert and later moved to California. When authorities arrested the sisters originally, they'd found Mary living in a basement apartment with her elderly mother, Martha Goodall Wardlaw, who was still alive at 82 years old. Martha died in 1910, having witnessed the complete destruction of her family's name and reputation. Mary survived until October 1937, dying in California at 88 years old. She outlived all her sisters, all her victims, and most of the people who remembered what she'd been part of. Fletcher Sneed eventually reclaimed his real name, settled in Los Angeles, and died there January 12, 1955, at age 80. He never spoke of it again. And little David, O.C.'s infant son? The sisters had dumped him in an orphanage where he died at 9 months old on July 18, 1910. He's buried beside his mother in Mount Hope Cemetery in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. Next to him lie his grandfather, Colonel Martin, his Uncle Hugh, and his infant sister, Mary Alberta, An entire row of family members, all cut down before their natural time. The building that now stands where Montgomery Female Academy once operated, currently housing county administrative offices, has a reputation among workers. Footsteps echo in empty corridors. Whispers drift through vacant rooms. Shadows move in ways that defy natural light. Some employees claim they've witnessed 3 figures moving through the halls, though they won't speak details about what they've seen. In Sunset Cemetery, where Virginia Wardlaw rests, locals tell a story. Walk 3 times around her grave at midnight, and she'll manifest before you. I've yet to meet anyone who completed those 3 circles. Something always interrupts them. A sound, a movement, a feeling so wrong it sends them running. But ghost stories aren't what troubles me most about this case. What keeps me turning it over in my mind is how long these women operated without consequence. How many people sensed something terrible but stayed silent? How many opportunities existed to intervene and save John, or O.C., or those babies? Dr. Simmons could have written suicide on his report and gone home to supper. Julius Caraba could have pocketed that $7,000 bribe and bought himself a comfortable life. But they didn't. Those small acts of moral courage, those moments when ordinary people chose conscience over convenience, that's what finally brought justice for O.C. Sneed. Imperfect justice, arriving years after it could have saved her. But without those men, we might never have known the truth at all. $76,000. That's what the Black Sisters collected from their dead. In today's money, close to $2 million. And what did all that blood money buy them? Virginia starved herself in a prison cell. Caroline died screaming in an asylum. Mary lived long, but she lived alone, carrying the weight of what she'd witnessed and enabled. Meanwhile, O.C. Sneed, 24 years old when they drowned her, never got to raise her son, never had a real home, never knew a single day of peace in her entire life. Everything stolen by the people who should have protected her most. Now, I've lived long enough to know that family bonds can be sacred things. That tie of blood should mean protection, loyalty, care for those who can't care for themselves. But I've also seen how greed can poison even the strongest bonds, how money can become more important than life itself. And the people who suffer most are always the ones with no voice, the young, the sick, the ones taught to trust. If you see someone being isolated by their family, cut off from help, controlled in ways that feel wrong, speak up. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Don't tell yourself it's not your business, because silence protects the predators, not the prey. And every person who stays quiet becomes part of the machinery of harm, whether they intend to or not. Dr. Simmons trusted his gut. Julius Caraba did what was right even when offered a fortune to look away. Those moments of everyday courage, that's what finally stopped these women. Imperfect justice, arriving years after it could have saved O.C., but without those men, we might never have known the truth at all. So I'll ask you straight, if you witnessed something wrong, would you speak? If someone needed help, would you step in? Or would you cross to the other side of the street like those folks in Christiansburg did for years, hoping someone else handles it? The Black Sisters of Christiansburg got away with murder for years because good people stayed silent. Don't let that be your story too. If this one moved you, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. And if you know someone who might be isolated or in trouble, someone who reminds you even a little of Osie's situation, maybe share this story with them. Sometimes just knowing that somebody's paying attention, that somebody cares enough to notice, can make all the difference between life and death. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your conscience clear.